Hello there and welcome to the Blythe tapes. This is going to be my series of interviews and chats with people in the publishing industry, with fellow authors and with anybody else who wants to come along and talk to me, really. And I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by my fellow author, Susan Elliot Wright. Susan is a Sheffield-based author and she's been published now for pretty much a decade, and she's had 4 novels out: The Things We Never Said, The Secrets We Left Behind, What She Lost, and The Flight of Cornelia Blackwood, and they're all published by Simon & Schuster. They're all out in lovely hardback, paperback, ebook. Go and look her up. Susan's books deal with a lot of different themes: love and grief and loss and parental relationships with children and mental health and people's secrets from the past, I suppose, which come back to haunt them, have an effect in their present day lives. Susan, welcome to the Blythe tapes.
Thank you, and thanks for having me on.
Well, it's a pleasure. Do you think that's a fair sort of summation of your writing, would you say?
That pretty much sums it up. Yes, I think so. Yep, you didn't miss anything out.
Good. It's quite hard, isn't it? Because people put us on the spot and want us to talk about our writing. And I think sometimes, we feel we express ourselves in our writing, and we think, I find anyway, it's quite hard to talk around it without sounding a bit cliched. And if someone grabs you at a party, and you remember those social events, at a party and says, look, what do you do? And you say, I'm a writer. And then they'll try and say, oh, what do you write about? And immediately it's quite difficult, isn't it?
Very difficult. It's very difficult. And then they say, well, where'd you get your ideas?
That's always the one, isn't it? That's always the one. Yes, I mean,
I usually say South Yorkshire Ideas Centre if they're open.
Yeah, one of those. Yeah. As you know, I do a lot of schools, and the kids always ask that question. It's one of their favourite questions, but I think it's one that adults tend to ask as well, isn't it? Where do your ideas come from? And it's a really hard one to answer. It's impossible, really. I mean, life experiences are really important, and your imagination, but often it's just a case of saying, well, these ideas just come to me and they're just there. And I think, you'd had a lot of different life experiences before being published, and it's sometimes you see new novelists being announced and they're sort of in their early 20s, straight out of college, and you'd done a lot of different things. You'd had 2 children and you'd done various jobs, and do you feel that has really helped and informed and made you a more kind of mature and reflective novelist than you would have been if you'd started in younger life?
Absolutely. I think if I'd have started writing in my 20s, I was always drawn to writing. I was always a great reader. But if I'd have started writing in my 20s, I just don't think I'd have had enough to say. I probably could have cobbled together a story, but I think as you get older, I think life experiences sort of feed into the things we want to understand, not only about ourselves, but about our fellow human. It's understanding how we all work, how we get on with each other, how these massive, life events affect us and how it changes our outlook. So I think all those things feed into my novels. And I mean, as you know, my first novel was published. I mean, I can't remember how old I was, but I was over 50 by the time my first novel was published. And people, sometimes people think that's too late. Well, I don't know. I would have had plenty to say when I was 40, but go much more before that, 30 probably, but not really before that. So
no, I think I was first published in my 20s, and I look back.
Yeah, but you're clever.
Well, I was lucky. I mean, I look back at the first thing I had published after the Doctor Who books, The Cut, and I look at it and think that's very much a young man's novel. That's a young man being strident and trying to be clever and trying to be Ian McEwan and Martin Amis, and I'm very critical of it. I mean, with a decade's perspective on your first book, do you look back and think there's something that I would have done differently, or anything I would have done differently with it?
Oh, definitely. I would say of my books, interestingly, the first one I would say is the most technically flawed, but it does still seem to be the most popular. It seems to have touched something, and I still, even 10 years on, I still get emails about that book. But I look back and think, gosh, if I was doing that again, I wouldn't have put that in. I'd have put that in a different place. I'd have explored this bit further. It's really interesting. I mean, that book took a long time to write, as most people, with your first novel does take a long time, because you go off in the wrong direction often and have to restart. And so it was, it was written over a number of years, and it was, I think, quite technically flawed, but somehow something in it seems to work.
We all do that, don't we? I think we look back and yeah, we can see the flaws in our early work, and you almost want to get the red pen out while you're reading from it and edit yourself as you go along while you're reading. I know I've done that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Um,
And with every book, actually, with every book, with even your most recent book, even if you think I've edited that as much as I can, when you're the first time you read it to the public, you will in your head think, I wish I hadn't put those extra words there in. You're sort of mentally crossing bits out all the time.
removing things, I think, more than putting things in.
Yeah.
I found.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Your first book, The Things We Never Said, I mean, that was your submission to the creative writing MA that you went
Right.
on. It turned into your first book. So at what point did you take the decision that you wanted to go and do a creative writing MA, and why do you think that would be important for your career?
Yeah, yes, it was a very good thing for me to do. I had dabbled with writing for many years. Excuse me. I'd always, as I said, always loved reading, always liked writing at school, like writing essays. I liked writing nice sentences. But I had started to write short stories probably I guess in my early 30s. I mean, before that, I had a very unhappy first marriage, and I left that when I was 30. Now, I wouldn't have been allowed to write in my first marriage. So we'll just leave it there, because, you know, that wouldn't be allowed. So even though I still had that desire to write, I didn't do it at all. But as soon as I left, I did. I started writing stories. I started going to creative writing classes. Got really very interested. Always wanted to write a novel, but thought, interestingly, I thought writing a novel would be hard because it was lots of words. I didn't realize that the difficulty is much more than the length of the book. But I carried on writing short stories, and I found that I'd write for a while, and then I'd leave it, and I hadn't written anything for a few weeks, and then I'd go back to it again. And people always said, if you want to be a writer, you have to write every day. And I thought, well, I don't write every day, so I can't possibly be serious about this. But it wouldn't leave me alone. You know, I kept going back to it. And in the end, I thought, no, if I'm going to take this seriously, I need to really, you know, move this up a grade. I'd already gone from just doing local evening classes to taking a course that I was in London at the time. I took a course at Birkbeck, which was a certificate in creative writing, which was very useful. And I think it was after that I thought I would really love to do a master's, but thought I probably wasn't good enough. So I then I got a mentor. I approached a mentor, and I said, what I want to do is I want to get together a portfolio so that I can apply for this MA. And so that's what we did. I worked with this woman for a year, just again doing short stories and getting feedback and rewriting them. And then I applied for the MA, and I got on the course. And at the time, the MA that I did at the time at Sheffield-Hallam was very, very well respected, really, really good MA. And it was one of the few, it no longer does this, it was one of the few in the country that you had to complete an entire novel in order to get your master's, which was why it was so great, I think. So yeah, so I did that, and what it did was, yeah, I had to write the whole novel. I mean, you get quite a while to do it, or you had, that time I think was 5 years in total writing up time, so only 2 years going in for for lectures or session seminars, and then you get writing up time, because obviously that's the work at home. So I learned so much while I was doing that. I learned so much, and when I submitted the novel for the MA, it was very different to the novel that is now published.
Yeah.
And I got some great feedback, and some of it was positive and some of it was negative. And I rewrote a lot of it in the 6 weeks following that feedback, and I felt I learned a lot in those 6 weeks. You know, and I sort of went on from there, and I was very lucky in that I did get an agent relatively quickly. In fact, I got an offer in my first send out, but that agent was going on maternity leave. But that gave me great confidence. And then it was another 6 months or so before I got an agent, but I did get an agent fairly quickly.
It's all a process of confidence building, isn't it? I think everybody takes a slightly different route down this path towards being a published novelist. I mean, I didn't do an MA, but I know it's been a really good thing for lots of people, and it's the validation that you get of your peers and of having someone say to you, yes, this is good enough to be professionally published. And then being taken on by an agent is another enormous step, and that's something that I think that that we have in common, when being taken on by an agent, and that felt like an enormous
Huge, yes,
validation. And
yeah,
then I think that's when you start to feel like a proper professional, isn't it? Someone in
like
the
a
industry,
real writer, yeah.
someone in the industry has looked at what I've done and actually wants to represent me. And yeah, I try and explain this to some of the new writers that I work with, that an agent has to be absolutely passionate about your work, because if you're quite a shy and retiring kind of writer, as I am, someone is out there fighting your corner, and the thought that there's someone who's more of an extrovert perhaps and is more used to going and sort of socializing with everyone in the publishing industry, and they can beat your drum and fight your corner for you. So with the process then between getting an agent and being published, roughly how long did that take you, and what was that process like?
Yeah, that was quite traumatic, actually, because I think that the other thing, you get an agent and you think, well, that's it, I've arrived, and you go and sit in coffee shops and talk loudly about my agent. I'm going to call my agent. My agent was great, actually. She was really brilliant, and she read the novel, and when she offered me representation, she had already made a lot of notes, and she was quite upfront. She said, I love your writing, but I think that this still needs quite a bit of work. She'd made a lot of notes on it, and she said, are you up for that? And I said, well, it depends what you say, but yes, I'm definitely up for a lot of work, but I won't necessarily agree with everything. And she was fantastic, and I agree with probably 80 to 90% of what she suggested. So I then went away and did another draft. We're on draft about 360 by this time. Did another draft, and then I'd send it back to her, and she'd say, great, we're almost there, but just can you sort this bit? And we go back and forth, and then we got it to the point where she was happy, and she sent it out, I think, to 12 publishers first time round, and it didn't get picked up. Although 4 of those publishers said they really wanted to see what I wrote next. I think a couple of them said that they loved the book, but they were all publishing something similar. One of them, or another one, sorry, that was those 4. Then there was another one, I think it was HarperCollins, I think, who weren't sure, but they took me out to lunch, and we talked a lot, and they wanted some changes, but they didn't want to sort of make any commitment. Anyway, long story short, it did not get picked up the first time, and my agent said, well, look, I think the best thing you can do is forget about it for a while, just put it aside and get on with your next book. So that's what I tried to do, but I really struggled to do that, because I just felt so, it really knocked me, because I thought it was going to get published. I've since, I know a lot more now, and I know just how precarious that is. At the time, I thought the fact that I got that far, it was going to happen. So I tried to get on with another book for about a year, and I started another book, and I made some headway, but I was still sort of haunted by the first book. And when I sort of picked it up and read it again, I thought, this is really not bad. And I wanted to try it again. And 2 things happened on the same day. There was an article in The Guardian by one of my old lecturers at Sheffield-based, Jane Rogers. And the article was called Why Novelists Need Publishers. And she argued that, it's all very well going for one of the big 6, but really, you've written a book, you've put life and soul into it, it deserves to be read. If it doesn't get picked up by a big publisher, you should consider smaller publishers, which I absolutely agreed with. So that was one thing. Then the other thing was, I bumped into John Mcgregor of his books, the title's so long, what was it called? His first novel that did so very, very well. Sorry, John, can't remember the title.
Yes,
very long.
Look it up.
We can't look it up, can we? Never mind. Everyone will know. It was great. It will come to me in a minute. Anyway, I bumped into him in a pub. We have a mutual friend who was playing in a band in a pub one night, and we were chatting, and I told him this experience, and he said, yeah, he said that's what happened to me. If nobody speaks of remarkable things, there we go. He said, that's what happened to me with that book. It didn't get part. I was told to put it aside and carry on. But he said, I then, I did haul it out again. I had another little tweak, and I tried it again. You should do that. Haul it out again and try again.
It's very interesting, isn't it? Everyone goes through this, I think, to an extent. You put your work aside, you come back to it and you suddenly have a whole new perspective on it.
That's right, yeah.
And it's really interesting to hear as well that your agent is quite similar to mine in taking that quite proactive role in being quite sort of editorial. And I know other writers I've spoken to whose agents don't do this.
Yeah.
Change the text very much, then they won't sort of get involved with it and try to draw out the best from it. And my agent is very much like that. She will get involved and she'll want the best possible kind of book to go out there. So that's really helpful. So yeah, it's a convoluted process that you went through, but finally you had the confidence in that manuscript, and you got eventually a 2-book deal with Simon.
I got a 2-book deal, yeah. On the second sentence, I mean, I did a little more rewriting, but not much. I just tweaked a couple of little things, and it went out again. And yes, I got a 2-book deal with Simon & Schuster, which was great.
So then you have the pressure of writing book 2, and musicians talk about the difficult second album syndrome, and writers have the difficult second book syndrome.
Absolutely.
So much of your experience in your life has gone into the first one, and you had several years to write the first one, and then even though you'd been working on book 2, it needed to come out a year after the first one, or what was it, a year to 18 months or so, wasn't it?
I think it was, yeah, I think it might have been 18 months, but yes, it was pretty soon after the first one. No, it was a year, but I had already done quite a bit of work on it at that point, yeah.
So was the pressure greater for book 2?
No, I don't think it was, to be fair, because when I got the book deal, when I got the 2-book deal, they wanted to know that there was a second book in the offing, and they wanted to know what it would be about. So I did have to provide a synopsis. And I had obviously I'd spent a year trying to write it. I think I'd probably written about, I don't know, 20 or 30,000 words, something like that. So I did have a chunk, and I had a synopsis. So I had something to go on. So when I got that deal, I think the agreement was that book 1 would be published in 2013 and book 2 would be published in 2014. And it was a year later. That got more difficult as time went on, because then they are looking for a book a year, and I can't write a book a year, so it's more like 18 months to 2 years for me.
No,
some people do, and it's amazing. I'm so impressed. Some people really focus and do it, but yeah, I struggle.
Most people I speak to, it's 18 months to 2 years, or 3 years even. I mean,
yeah,
3 years. And yes, great stuff. We're on the Blythe tapes, which is on my YouTube channel, and I'm talking to Susan Elliot Wright, who is a Sheffield-based novelist. And Susan is not only extremely popular, but very sort of critically acclaimed as well. I mean, you've got great reviews plastered all over your covers, and you have great Amazon reviews as well. I mean, do those things balance out in your mind? Do you want to be popular with the reading public, or more popular with the critics, or does it not matter which? Would you like?
I want it all, Dan. I want it all. It's lovely to be, obviously, to be popular with readers is the most important thing. At the end of the day, that's the most important thing, and I treasure some of the emails that I've had from readers. And sometimes it's messages on Facebook these days, but you know, there were a lot of emails at first, and I absolutely love those. Having said that, my most recent book, The Flight of Cornelia Blackwood, is described as critically acclaimed, and I am so glad to have one book that has been described as critically acclaimed.
It's good, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes, so that's nice. I'd love them all to be critically acclaimed and popular with readers, but that may be a bit greedy.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult because readers will be quite harsh sometimes, and you can go on Amazon and find someone's been horrible about your book, and it can day. Although I think Goodreads is harsher than Amazon. I've stopped looking at Goodreads myself.
It is, yeah. And I didn't discover Goodreads for a long time, and then a lot of other writers said to me, "Don't go there, just don't." But by the time I did, I feel now I'm much stronger, and the you know, bad reviews still come, but they do sort of wash off me now. Whereas at first I found it very difficult. And there are some people who wait till publication day or the day after and then give you a rotten review on the day your books come out. You know, it's just rotten, isn't it? Why?
Just let's look at another aspect. We are talking today on International Women's Day, And I wondered if, as a woman novelist, how you felt about the way that you've been treated by the industry as a woman, the way you're perceived as a woman writer. Do you feel that you've been, patronised at all as a woman writer, talked down to in a way that a male novelist wouldn't? Do you feel that you've been pigeonholed as a woman's writer? How do you feel about all of that?
I certainly haven't been. I haven't been talked down to or patronised. I haven't personally, but I know a lot of women writers are and have. More in the past, perhaps, but it does still happen. Not happened to me. I am marketed as I'm marketed as a writer of women's fiction, and I'm not really sure how I feel about that, to be honest. It's done well enough for me, but what I don't understand is why I can't be marketed as someone who writes fiction rather
Yeah.
than women's fiction. What is it that makes my books women's fiction? And say, for example, I know he's often used the example, Jonathan Franzen, who also writes about family relationships and family arguments and secrets that have been buried in the past. Why isn't he why doesn't he write women's fiction?
It's very interesting. Yeah, I mean, you go into a bookshop, and there it is on the wall. It's a gigantic display of women's fiction. It's a genre next to the sci-fi, next to the horror, next to the crime. You're a genre in the way that men's fiction isn't, and you can't imagine. You can't imagine, say, Nick Hornby or Martin Amis or Ian McEwan agreeing to be pigeonholed as men's fiction.
No,
And
exactly.
I want to read a lot of novels by women. I know lots of women readers who want to read novels by men. I've been to your events and you have a mixture of male and female readers there. I'd say it's marginally more women, but probably not a lot, maybe 60-40. So yes, what is it? Are women expected to write about certain things? Is it because women dominate the readership? Is it because more women read books, so more women write books for women?
I think that's an interesting point. I think women do buy them. They are the biggest book buying group, actually, older women particularly. Yeah, absolutely. So women are really great readers. But I think but women read all sorts of books. Women they like fantasy, they like science fiction, they like crime, particularly very popular with women. I know women who love reading westerns. I know a woman who writes westerns. It does seem to be it's this stereotype of this is what we think women enjoy reading. And they may well enjoy reading that, and I enjoy reading that, and that's fine. But why do you have to call it women's fiction? Because as you just said, Dan, lots of men read exactly the same books and enjoy them, and I feel that they're being, sometimes they're left out. I mean, I've had emails from male readers, which is great, but I think the way my books are marketed might put some men off. I've got to be honest, it'd be hard for a guy to walk into Waterstones and pick up a book with a cover that is very clearly aimed at women. That might be a bit, or he might pretend he's buying it for his wife, I suppose. But
yeah, I don't think yours are so much. If you look at some of them,
certainly not so much now. I think the first, and I love the first cover, but I think it was marketed very much at women on the first book. But yeah,
you have some quite dark and moody covers now, which are more kind of reflecting the content, particularly of the last book. But yeah, it is difficult for a man to go in and pick up a novel which is pink and which has a on it and this sort of thing. And it seems to be contemporary women's fiction as well, isn't it, that has this pigeonholing. You don't get it with women's. A lot of women, as you say, write fantasy, write sci-fi, write historical novels, and they don't tend to get put on that shelf. It's all about contemporary, domestic, family life women's fiction, which is interesting.
Also, I mean, the other thing is, and sometimes the genre gets confused because I know the genre of romance is a genre. But sometimes I think people say when they confuse women's fiction with romance, and there may well be a romance in women's fiction, but there's also often a romance in a detective novel. There's often even if you watch a film, if you watch a Western, there will be a romance in it.
Absolutely.
There are writers, male writers who write, very much what we would imagine as male books, which are not, crime, Western, spy thrillers. They've all got romances in them. There's a love story, but do they ever say that's a romance? No, it's...
You mean you've preempted the very thing I was going to come on to talk about, which is pigeonholing in general. I mean, wanting, publishers maybe want us to be a particular kind of writer. They say, right, you write crime or you write historical, and writers don't want that as much, do we? I mean, it's the booksellers, it filters down from the booksellers through the publishers, and they want to be able to say, which shelf is this going to go on? Or which virtual shelf is this going to go on? And we want to say, well, we want to be read by readers. We want to be read by people. And we don't mind if it's men or women. Don't mind if I'm writing sci-fi that's read by people who hate sci-fi. We don't want to be pigeonholed, do we? We want to be...
That's absolutely true. And I think sci-fi is a very interesting an interesting example, because I think personally as a reader, if I see something labelled sci-fi, I think, oh, that's probably not for me. But actually the sci-fi books I have read, I've enjoyed. So, it's pigeonholing. Having said that, though, I think it's only fair to say that for publishers, and as you say, it filters down from the booksellers, but it is a business. They're in it to make money. We're in it because we have to do it, but for art, we have to write these books. We hope we can make a little money along the way. Not many of us make very much at all. But yeah, they do. It has to be a business. So I guess the targeting is, probably the result of lots of meetings and steering groups and focus groups and things that have worked out that this is the best way to get to sell the largest number of books.
This is it. I mean, we write a book every 18 months, 2 years, and we absolutely are passionate about the book that we're writing. Whereas an editor has, a couple of hundred books to edit every year, and they can't possibly be equally passionate about them all. Absolutely. And they've got to be quite dispassionate and treat it as a business, as you say. And we have to be quite businesslike, but also we feel, our books are our babies in a way that perhaps an editor so much. Although we want an editor who loves our work, don't we? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm talking on the Blythe tapes to Susan Elliot Wright, who is a contemporary novelist who is classified as a women's writer of women's fiction, even though we've talked about why you may not like that so much. Your main characters, your protagonists are contemporary people, and they have your books build in flashbacks to, say, 20, 30, 40 years ago, and there's always a story running in the background, which is something in the character's past. Have you ever thought of setting a book entirely in the past? Would you be attracted by doing completely historical novel?
I have thought of that. In fact, there's a book that I have started and worked on several times that has yet to see the light of day. My agent she liked what I've written. This got up to maybe 2 years ago, 18 months ago. She was very keen and actually sent a section off to my editor, who liked it but wasn't passionate about it. And I know exactly what she meant. I think she was right, that it might be a great story in itself, but it probably wouldn't sell. And I think that was a fair point. But yeah, it's not historical. Well, I don't think so anyway. But it was set in the 60s.
Right.
And it's something I still would like to write, and it would be set. Well, it would start in the 60s, and it would probably end in the, I guess, early 80s, maybe, if not a bit before that. But yeah, I haven't actually published anything like that. But because I love that period. I think it's a fascinating period in history, and I love researching that period as well. I think it would be great fun to write a novel set in the 60s entirely.
I'm writing something set in the 1890s for children, and
wow,
thought I would have research, but I actually really do quite enjoy it.
Right, yeah.
There's a supernatural sci-fi element to that as well. I mean, the other half of this question is, have you considered that you might like to write something set in the future? Because if you think about, there are novels which are sort of technically sci-fi, but they're not. Thinking of things like Ian McEwan's Child in Time and The Handmaid's Tale and P.D. James' Children of Men, which are set slightly in the future, but obviously are commenting on events in the present day.
Yes.
Would that attract you at all, or would that be outside your comfort zone?
Yeah, no, I think it would be outside my comfort zone. I enjoyed reading. I loved Naomi Alderson's The Power, for example, which was set just a little bit in the future. Similarly, Jane Rogers' The Testament of Jessie Lamb, which is set, about 6 months in the future. I love that. But yeah, I think it would be out of my comfort zone.
Very hard to do. I think setting things slightly in the future is really hard. I mean, I remember watching
Yeah.
Years and Years last year, and
Oh, yes. Yeah.
the speculations about what's going to happen 10, 15 years from now, I think, are harder than doing something, you know, like my book Exiles, which is set hundreds of years in the future. I think
Yeah.
that's easier in a way.
Well,
Yeah,
I guess in a way, people can't argue with you. If you say that a couple of hundred years in the future, this is going to happen, this is how we're going to be traveling, this is how we're going to be communicating, nobody can say, hang on a minute, that doesn't work. But if you set it, you know, in 2022 or 2023, people are going to say, hang on, how are we going to make the leap from this to that in 2 years?
how
So
we communicate and so on. Yeah, and things can date so easily as well. I've noticed that references in things that I've written in the past to people flipping open their phones, you know, and I thought, oh God, why did I put that in? Why didn't I future-proof that reference to the mobile phone?
it's
Great
language,
stuff.
isn't it? We still say we
Yeah,
make a call and we hang up. Well,
hang
what
up.
do you hang and where do you hang it?
That's something of our generation, perhaps, that we
Yes,
as
maybe.
middle-aged people that we always do. So your writing has actually led you on to some other interesting things, hasn't it? I mean, we talked about some of the jobs that you did in the past, but you've gone on to, as a result of being a successful writer, you've been an associate lecturer on the MA at Hallam, and you've also been a Royal Literary Fund fellow. So how have those things sort of helped and, you know, informed your writing and developed you as a writer?
Yeah, they help enormously, actually. I think because I think one of the greatest ways of learning how to write, you learn by reading. And you take that a step further. If you're reading the work of other writers, of new writers, and you're actually critiquing that work, as in, you know, you're looking for what works in the piece and what doesn't work so well. And you're also looking for ways that you might help that writer improve what they've written, then that all the time, that's your writer's brain
Yeah.
practicing our craft, isn't it? You know, and I know you've done the same, Dan. You've sort of taught, you know, you've worked with other writers, and you do the same thing. And I'm sure you find the same that I do. That, but I think we learn, we learn so much by looking at a problem that another writer may have encountered and
Right.
thinking, right, how can we help this writer move forward from that? What, well, they could, you know, he could do this, or she could change that viewpoint, or, you know, and that will really give us some insight, I think, and some practice it with our own writing on things we can change, because the process, just for, you know this, but for anyone watching, the process of writing is very much about rewriting. You try something, you see if it works. If it doesn't, you try something else.
Yeah, and it's hard to have that dispassionate distance from your own work, whereas if you're working on someone else's work, then suddenly you realize what you're doing and you can go away and apply that to your own. Yes,
That's
interesting
it.
stuff. Yeah.
And I love the process as well of working with other. I love working with other writers, and I especially love the bit where you get together with a writer, you've looked at their work, you tell them what you think, you make some suggestions. The writer says, "Oh, I don't know what to do about this." And you say, "Well, you could do that or that or that." And the writer said, "Well, I could do that or that." And then suddenly you're both excited because
Yes. Yeah.
that writer is on the move and you've helped to move it forward. And they run off and rewrite, and it, you know, it's that excitement of thinking, right, this is the way we can move forward. So it's very, very rewarding, I
It
think.
is rewarding. Yes. So after 4 novels, then, how do you feel that you have sort of evolved as a writer? What do you feel are the greatest things that you've learned about your own writing that you've come to
That's a
apply?
really good question.
Way in which you feel you've changed in the last decade as a writer, you've improved.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I tend to still write about the same topic. I think it's and I think I heard somebody say this years ago, that writers do tend to explore the same things because we get a bee in our bonnet about something, we want to understand it, and we just go into it in all possible angles. Um, and I think so. I think I tend to write about the same things. I write a lot about it's family relationships. It's often parents and children, could be mothers and daughters, mothers and sons, fathers and sons, um, estranged families, displaced families, mixed up families. Family secrets is a big one. I do like a family secret. So yeah, I am going for the same thing. Mental health, you mentioned. I mean, another thing, mental health, particularly
Very much so.
maternal mental health. That's something that I come back to again and again. And that, you know, we talked about life experience. It's something that I suffered from postnatal depression, and I now know postnatal psychosis, which I've written a lot about, and I've also written a lot about in quite a long blog piece on my website. So that was the subject of my most recent book. So you do want to go back to these things. In terms of changing and growing as a writer, I think I'm a better writer. I think technically, I think my book, as I said, the first one, the most technically flawed, the most popular, but I think my books have got better. And actually my editor says the same thing. She said, each of your books is better than the last, which is great. And that's what you would aim for.
I think as a reader, I found it quite hard to decide which of yours is my favorite. And for a long time, I thought Watch Us was my favorite. But I think now, Cornelia Blackwood's my favorite because of what you did with the narrative. I think that because it's not just about the secrets that the main character is keeping in the past, you've also got this tension of this almost like thriller-like narrative in the present, where, without giving too much away, your protagonist is forced to enter into a deception, isn't she? Because of something she discovers about her husband. She has to deceive somebody in a friendship that she has with another woman, and so you've got that tension going along in the present day narrative of when and how she will be uncovered. And actually, that ultimately is not, well, we kind of take our eye off the ball with that a bit, I think, without giving anything away about the ending, because the ending is quite devastating. And then you discover the actual meaning of the title, which you've been assuming is one thing and turns out to be something else. So,
yes.
Quite clever. So, yeah, so that's Susan's latest book, The Flight of Cornelia Blackwood. And do go and read it because it's very good. But read her others too. Tell us your...
Sorry, just to jump in, because what you've just done in summing, that's really lovely things to say, but what you've just done is you've actually reminded me how, that's how I've grown as a writer. I've now learned, I think, how to do the thrillery thing. I think I've learned a lot more about tension and about how to hold things back and reveal them more slowly. I think that's the biggest thing I've learned, perhaps.
Very hard to do. It's very hard to do. I'm still learning it as well. Yeah.
Yeah, we're always learning, aren't we, all the way along.
If you want to find out more about Susan and her writing, then you can find out on her website. Give us your website address, Susan.
It is, well, I don't need to say the W thing, do I? It's the W thing, susanelliottwright.co.uk.
I shall put that up on the screen, susanelliottwright.co.uk. Go and explore her writing, and do go and buy her books. Susan, it's been great talking to you today. Thank you very much for
talking to you too.
Being a victim, being a guinea pig on the Blythe.
It's an absolute pleasure.
And we shall talk more anon, I'm sure. But yeah, thank you very much for your time, and we shall leave it there. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.